What's going on, Dolphins? It is your boy Dillon, and I am here with you today because I wanted to read you this article on ESPN. Right, comes from ESPN. Bill Barnwell, he's actually pretty well known. Bill Barnwell, an article that he wrote for ESPN. And it's entitled, "Are the Dolphins Really Doing This? How They Could Tank and Win." Right? So how they could make this whole tank thing work. Which, it's funny because as I read this article, it really sounds, everything that's in here, for the vast majority of it, actually sounds like reasons why it's not going to work. But let's go through it and see what you think. So keep in mind, this is an article defending how this tank job could work. Through 3 weeks, the Miami Dolphins are the worst team in NFL history. Brian Flores' team has been outscored 133-16 for a point differential of -117. That's 20 points worse than the previous record holder since the merger, the 1950 Colts. But at least those Colts briefly led in one of their 3 blowout losses. Miami hasn't made it out of the first half of the first quarter with a tie. It has scored 1 touchdown in 3 weeks, which isn't an NFL record. It has allowed 18 touchdowns over that same time frame, which is. Of course, the Dolphins aren't trying to be competitive. While they might not be willing to admit it publicly, they are the latest organization to actively tank and show little regard for winning, which have been other teams that have tanked, but certainly not to this level. And there's no evidence at all that those previous teams in the NFL that have tanked were successful. And I'm really kind of tired of people using NBA and baseball examples, because those are way different sports and structured far differently. They are both amassing draft capital by trading away talents like Laramie Tunsil and Minka Fitzpatrick for first-round picks and trying to ensure that their own picks land as high as possible. You don't need to look far to find successful examples of teams tanking as part of their rebuilds. The Astros and Cubs parlayed years of dismissal seasons into World Series victories. Again, though, you can't compare them, right? Team size is different. Structure of the game is different. The rules are different. Those games are not nearly as violent or physical. Contract structure is different. The draft is structured way different than those. So, I mean, with the NBA, you can get one player that changes your entire team. It's not like that with football and the NFL, right? There are so many key differences between the NBA and MLB and the NFL. Like, there's no way that a tank job can be successful for a lot, or rather, I suppose there is some possibility it could be successful, but a tank job to this degree, to this level, probably not. And I mean, just because the likelihood, the obstacles that you have to overcome is just too much, right? Now, when teams do like just little rebuilds, yeah, but when you flush out as much as you have just to take, chances and gamble, on the future. Anyway, let's continue on, because a lot of that will get pointed out as I go. The 76ers, again, a basketball team who tanked with gusto under Sam Hinkie, are among the favorites to win the 2020 NBA championship. Okay, great. But this isn't basketball. Again, right? I mean, it's just crazy. It's way different. Anyway, the Browns haven't posted a winning season since the start of the rebuild, but with Baker Mayfield, Myles Garrett, and Odell Beckham Jr., they have one of the most exciting young cores in the NFL. True. And I've been saying, I actually said going into this season that the Browns are going to be a powerhouse because of how talented they are. They do also have a lot of big personalities and egos with OBJ and Jarvis Landry and Mayfield and a bunch of these guys, right? And they haven't been performing. So first of all, when it comes to the Browns, we're not even close to being able to say that's successful, right? Because they haven't done anything yet. They haven't actually won anything yet. And we're talking about sustained success. So we're not even going to know potentially for a few years if they've even made it to that level. Because we're talking about sustained success where they are starting to make playoff appearances like every year, right? Where they get into that conversation where you just expect the Browns to be there every year. They're still super far from that, which this year is even proving because they are struggling pretty mightily in a lot of ways, right? So, but again, that just goes to show how difficult it is in the NFL. Anyway, let's continue. The tenets of tanking roughly align with what research has suggested are best practices, particularly in football. This is a ridiculous claim. Young quarterback, but when he says research, though, let's make it clear that he's talking about contracts, right? So what he's talking, and he'll explain this a little bit more, although this is kind of a silly claim, but he's talking about in terms of contracts and like the value you get for various positions, the different positions, so like whatever position that you take at whatever position in the draft versus whatever position they're taking in the draft. So, the value you get for a first round quarterback on their rookie deals, right? And anyway, so I'll let him explain. Because I'm not doing a very good job of it. Young quarterbacks playing on rookie deal contracts are the most valuable players in the sport. In a league in which organizations are overconfident about their ability to identify ideal draft picks, acquiring as many picks as possible is the best way to build a roster. Pause for just a second. So I do think it is a good plan to always try and accumulate draft capital. But part of that philosophy for me is never taking a quarterback in round 1 or 2 and never trading up to get one. And in fact, if you do have a higher draft pick, then you trade down and accrue more picks, right? But just simply saying that having a bunch of shots and throwing them at a dartboard, essentially, just having a bunch of darts and throwing them at a dartboard is the way to go. No, it depends. It depends. It's not black and white like that. That's part of it, but you got to get those picks right. And in this case, we literally have to hit home run after home run after home run if we're hoping to have a chance at being competitive in the time frame that people want, right? And so, and also, well, let's just continue on because we'll get more into that and how they're gonna spend in free agency. They said that they're gonna be big spenders in free agency, which I don't like. The Dolphins have gone 6-10, 7-9, or 8-8 in 9 of the past 10 campaigns, except for in 2016 when we went 10-6 and made it to the playoffs under Gase. And haven't won a playoff game since the 2020 season. Fair, but if we did have Ryan Tannehill in that playoff game, we certainly would have stood a much better chance than Matt Moore. After a decade of mild incompetence, you can understand why the Dolphins might pursue a more aggressive strategy. Okay, real quick stop there. So, we've been mediocre for the past few decades, which is illustrated there by those records. That's somewhere in the middle of the pack. But he's even using the worst records though. We've had some 9-7s and some 10-6s and stuff as well. So we've been somewhere for the past few decades between 10-6 and 6-10. So mediocre, right? Sure. Am I tired of that? Do I think that the answer is a hope and dream several years in the future and in the meantime having to deal with the worst team ever put on the field? No. I don't think that's the right or appropriate approach at all. In fact, I think that is a massively disastrous approach that is going to blow up in your face sooner rather than later, even. So anyway, after a mild incompetence, yes. So do I want this kind of aggressive strategy? No. In fact, I don't even really want an aggressive strategy at all. That's why I liked Adam Gase's strategy, right? He was building a culture where, you know, he depends on his guys. They pay their guys. It's the perfect cycle, right? Like, you draft guys and you develop them. So that's important, right? And that's how you build the draft, or build your team through the draft, and supplement just here and there. No big free agents. He started getting rid of all the big priced free agents. Stopped doing that. He wanted to build a team where they pay their guys internally. So the beauty of that is you draft a guy, right? You develop him, and then you also tell him, hey, look, if you perform for us, then we'll pay you big money. But also, part of the benefit with that is not only do you keep the guys that you drafted and so on and so forth, you build a trusting culture, but also what you'll notice is a lot of those guys are then actually willing to take a little bit less. Kenny Stills actually, in fact, did this. Then they'll be willing to take a little bit less, actually, and maybe instead of being, you know, instead of maybe Xavier Howard being the highest paid corner, maybe he would have been okay with being the second or third highest paid corner in the league. Whatever. Maybe not. But there are actually examples of guys who then want, because, you know, and then on top of that, he had a culture where, you know, let's bounce ideas off each other. If you see something in the game that's working, come talk to me. Brian Flores' style, no, you can't do that, because the players feel, and Jerome Baker had said this, if you even make a suggestion to them, you could be axed. Terrible, terrible. Let's continue on. And yet there are obvious arguments against tanking. Plenty of bad baseball teams have embraced analytics and traded away talent without enjoying a renaissance like the Astros or Cubs did. So real quick, stop there. So even in the sports where it does work, you know, pretty well overall, there are, you know, plenty, according to, and I don't follow baseball that much, really, or really at all, so he knows far more about this than I do, but apparently there are plenty of failed attempts. It's even harder and less likely to work. The chances of it working in the NFL are like super slim. Hinkie and former Browns general manager Sashi Brown didn't keep their jobs long enough to see their tanking efforts through to completion. NFL teams such as the Chiefs and Eagles have managed to find their star quarterback and build around them without abandoning hope for years, which is what the Dolphins have done. Our Dominique Foxworthy also pointed out the moral and ethical concerns inherent in asking players to put their bodies on the line for a team with no desire to contend. And they shouldn't have to. Nor should fans be okay with this. Let's take a closer look at what the Dolphins are doing. Is this egregious? Are they doing a good job of tanking? Could they learn something from what the Browns went through? And then, even if they have a sound plan, is it likely to deliver the sort of turnaround they are hoping to achieve? Just how bad is this team? You might remember that the Browns went winless long enough to inspire a free beer promotion. Real quick, let's stop there. I also haven't seen Stephen Ross offer, you know, discounted tickets or discounted concessions or any kind of promotion to say, hey, you know what? We want you to trust this process that we're going through. There's absolutely no guarantee that it's actually going to work. And at the very least for this year, we're probably going to be the worst team that ever existed in football history, pro football history. But we're not going to take the hit along with you. We're going to make sure that we keep all of the fucking proceeds at, you know, at full price, beer prices, all that stuff. And you just got to suffer through it. That's why I tell y'all, don't go to the games. Don't buy the tickets. Do not, you know, buy jerseys and stuff like that. They need to be hurt by the hurt that they're putting on us. If you guys are mad and pissed about this, make sure you hurt them back. Real quick, I will say that I have been thinking about getting a Dolphins t-shirt or something, only because, and I'm being just totally honest and transparent with y'all, only because I need a new one for my videos. I either have my jerseys or this tank top, and I like it, but I wash it regularly, but it's all I have. I'm poor. I'm sorry. But so I do want to get something else, but it would just be for my videos and for y'all. So if y'all think that's wrong, let me know. I haven't decided yet, but we'll see. Anyway, let's continue on. Let's see. During their rebuild, though, they were never as bad over any 3-week span as the Dolphins have been during these first 3 weeks. The Browns' worst performance under the ill-fated reign of Hugh Jackson was a 25-point loss to the Cowboys in 2016. Miami's best performance of the season so far is its 25-point loss to the Cowboys in Week 3, given that it lost to the Patriots by 43 and the Ravens by 49. Real quick pause there. So, again, there's not even any legitimate proof to say that what the Browns have done or are doing is going to pay off yet. They're still at least a few years away from determining whether or not they're going to be able to even rise to the level of having success before they rise to the level of being able to sustain that success. So, and on top of that, the Browns were not anywhere near this bad, or did not take it anywhere near to this level that the Dolphins have done. So our situation is far worse and far more dire than the Browns situation ever was, and they're struggling to even get to the point of relevance, let alone competitiveness and so on and so forth, right? With a 2018 Week 17 loss to the Bills included, the Dolphins are the first team since the AFL-NFL merger to lose 4 straight by 25 points or more. I don't think you really should include that last one, but it is a fact that that is the case. There aren't many reasons to think that things are likely to get significantly better for the Dolphins this season either. Their schedule will get easier. I don't know about that. I mean, we do play a few teams that are struggling, including the Jets twice and the right now the Steelers. But I'm fairly confident every team we play is going to beat us, because we will find a way to lose, if nothing else. And we're going to continue getting hurt. It's going to get worse. It's going to get worse, unfortunately. But that's just where all the data points. Anyway. They've played 3 likely playoff teams in the Ravens, Patriots, and Cowboys, but 2 of their first 3 games were at home. Their future schedule is the 22nd toughest in the league, according to ESPN's Football Power Index. The same model gives them a 13.4 chance of losing out and going 0-16, which is remarkably high given just how many chances they still have to win a game. So you think 13.4% isn't high, but for context, 3 weeks into Cleveland's 0-16 season, FPI thought the Browns had just a 0.4% chance, or 0.4% shot of going winless. FPI thinks Miami's chances of going 0-16 are about the same as the Rams' chances of winning the Super Bowl, pegging the latter at 14.8%. So the Rams right now only have a 14.8% chance of winning the Super Bowl. We have a 13.4% chance of going winless, and in the Browns season they were only at 0.4%. I'm telling y'all, man, this regime did this to us. I'm not a hater. I'm not a fake fan or whatever kind of nonsense some people like to say, because I point out the atrocities that this regime is committing and am enraged about it and want to do something about it. That actually makes me, I think, personally, a true fan. That I'm not only can I recognize it, but I'm pissed about it and want to do something. I think the Dolphins might have a slightly better chance of pulling off at least one victory than FPI, owing to circumstance more than skill. No, I don't think so, because in those circumstances, I'm pretty sure they will find a way to win. Stephen Ross demanded that we tank this season and partly fired Gase because of that, so that way we could get a quarterback high in the draft. Brian Flores acquiesced and is doing just that. And there have been, I'm not saying this is for sure, again, it's not substantiated by any means, but there have been a lot of really questionable decisions that he's made just across the board. Even the fact that he fired his offensive line coach a week after training camp started, right? Even if you thought he wasn't doing a good job, I mean, still, it brought into question your ability to choose a coaching staff. And the fact also that you lost one to health concerns, although that shouldn't be, he shouldn't be blamed for that, because you can't predict that necessarily. I mean, I suppose it depends on what the situation is. I mean, but nobody expected that, so he shouldn't be blamed for that. Anyway, so let me continue on. I don't think that they have a chance, unfortunately. I think that they will figure out a way to lose. In week 17, Miami travels to New England. And here's the thing. This is the most ridiculous, this is the absolute most ridiculous example to use for why the Dolphins might have a chance to win a game. In week 17, Miami travels to New England for its rematch with the Patriots. Unsurprisingly, FPI projects a Patriots blowout, with New England expected to win by 29.9 points, so about 30 points. The Pats have occasionally sat key players in past week 17s, including the likes of Julian Edelman, Chandler Jones, Dante Hightower, and Sebastian Vollmer, and a 20-10 loss to the Dolphins in 2015. If the Pats rest some of their starters, the Dolphins' chances would obviously improve. Are you serious, dude? You think that we're going to go into fucking Foxborough and with this team lose? Let's also keep in mind, in 2015, they had Ryan Tannehill. So a lot of people made a big deal about how when the Patriots go down to Miami, they tend to lose, and they have 5 of the last 6. Well, now it's 5 of the last 7. But 5 of the last 6, yes. But the vast majority of that was with Ryan Tannehill there. And also an overall better team. Ryan Tannehill never had much of a team around him to begin with. And look, he makes that point later on in this, which we'll get to, but he never had much of a team to begin with. But all the teams he had were better than what this team is now. Far better. They stripped us across the board. Anyway, let's continue. Otherwise, FPI isn't enthusiastic. The algorithm thinks the Dolphins' best shot at a victory will come in week 6, when they'll host a Washington team that might be debuting rookie quarterback Dwayne Haskins. And I bet you anything that if they do, I bet you he's still gonna fucking light us up. I bet you that's gonna be a game where the rookie looks really good because we allowed him to just fucking light us up. Even there, against one of the worst teams in the league at home, FPI projects the Dolphins to lose by 7 points and believes they have just a 30.3% shot of winning outright. Home games against the Jets and Bengals are the only other times Miami isn't projected to lose by double digits. What's disconcerting too is that we might be seeing the most talented version of the Dolphins here in September. Their roster took several hits from the Tunsil trade during the preseason, and they have less talent in their secondary after trading Fitzpatrick to the Steelers. They benched quarterback Ryan Fitzpatrick for Josh Rosen, and while I fully support the move to get as long of a look at Rosen as possible, there's a chance that he simply isn't an NFL caliber quarterback. I actually don't think that. I think he has the shot to be, just not here and not in this kind of situation. The Dolphins will also inevitably deal with injuries as the season goes along, having already put starting offensive linemen Julian Davenport and Danny Isidora on injured reserve. And again, of course, we are going to continue to see more and more injuries, as all teams do. They also could opt to trade away one or more of the veterans on their roster. Fitzpatrick would presumably be an upgrade for some of the teams hit by injuries at quarterback, and he's not exactly needed in Miami. Running back Kenyon Drake and wide receiver Devontae Parker are pending free agents. Wideout Albert Wilson isn't healthy, but the Dolphins will likely look to release the former Chiefs wideout after the season if they don't need his deal to help hit the spending floor. Honestly, I really don't think that Devontae Parker or Albert Wilson will be part of this long-term rebuild or whatever the fuck, and there's a good chance they do trade Kenyon Drake at some point. Ryan Fitzpatrick, I'm pretty sure that they're just going to outright cut him after the season. The last star left on the roster is cornerback Xavier Howard, who was signed to a 5-year, $75.3 million extension in May. Perhaps knowingly, and this is actually something I didn't know until I read this, but this is actually really concerning to me and doesn't make me like, this was like the one thing that I gave them 100% credit for, and it kind of makes me take it back a bit. Anyway, perhaps knowingly, the Dolphins structured Howard's deal in such a way to make it reasonably tradable. Miami would owe only $7.1 million in dead money on its cap if it traded Howard, most of which would come as a $5.6 million charge in 2020. Any team acquiring Howard would be picking up a 26-year-old star corner for what amounts to a 5-year, $61.3 million extension starting in 2020. That's roughly what Malcolm Butler got in free agency in 2018, and Howard is a much better player. So that deal would be fabulous for somebody, even if they gave us a first-round pick. Okay, and with the way that Howard is going, with the comments that he's made, the frustration he showed, and with the fragility of this relationship with the Dolphins, don't be surprised if Howard ends up also leaving for another future, even like I said, a first-round pick that could potentially, be something. But it's a shot in the dark, man. And Howard is a guaranteed, proven commodity. And but again, don't think that just because they paid him that it's a guaranteed thing that he's going to be here. Okay, moving on. How Miami has loaded up on draft picks. It's clear that the Dolphins are willing to write off the 2019 season if it means accumulating valuable draft picks down the line. Even if you disagree with their plan, you can probably understand their logic. No, because everything... Look, on its face, again, accumulating draft picks and clearing up cap space and stuff by getting rid of like high-priced free agents, whatever. Yes, overall, but there has to be a balance, and they've gone way too far to the extreme. That's the biggest problem with it, is that the extreme is like, and they're not even done. They're not even done going to the extreme. They're shooting to the extreme. They've shot to the extreme at like breakneck speed, and they're still going, right? It's not going to get any better. It's going to get a lot worse before it gets any better, before it even has a chance to get any better. So, I mean, it's ridiculous. That's why even any of the good things that you could take from this, right? Like, you could have a pros list that's like generously 10 things long, which is stupid generous, because what do you have? The Xavier Howard contract. If you want to be generous, the Jakeem Grant contract. If you're being really generous, Josh Rosen and Xavier Howard. So 4 things. Your pros list is like, draft capital, a bunch of draft capital, so 5, and cap space. I'll even separate those 2 things. So your pros list is like 6 things long. Your cons list is like through the floor. It's ridiculous and growing. Anyway, the Adam Gase teams of 2016 through 18 weren't going to win a title as constructed with Tannehill at quarterback, even if they managed to ride a bunch of close victories against subpar opponents into the playoffs during Gase's debut season. Okay, hold on. Pause again there. I really hate... if you look at Tannehill's stats and the records and so on and so forth, again, he's a really good quarterback. It was always the team around him. Last year, we got decimated by injuries. Again, we had over 10 players on an injured reserve at the end of the season, and that I want to say it was 12, and that was after 2 people came back. We have 4 right now, still 2 eligible to come back halfway through the season. So if it stood right now, we would have 2 at the end of the season. That is a massive difference. Okay? That team, last year, by the way, at this time last year, we were 3-0. Why? Because that team was built great until the fucking injuries. Anyway, and again, if he didn't get hurt, we could have stood a much better chance of winning that game. Look, after all, we thrashed the Steelers in the regular season. If we would have, with Tannehill, if we would have had, that was our turnaround game. If we would have, sure, they could have learned some stuff and studied up, but so would we have. If we would have had Tannehill, we could have done a lot better. It's not Tannehill that's the problem. Everybody focuses on the quarterback position way too much. But again, also too, we still went to the fucking playoffs that year for the first time in 8 years at that time. It was like, it's ridiculous. Anyway, the Dolphins are stuck in a division with a dynasty, but one whose quarterback is 42. The Bills and Jets made their moves to go after young quarterbacks and try to be the best team in the division after Tom Brady retires. Miami clearly projects itself to be good right around the time the Patriots will need a new quarterback. Yeah, they hope. They hope. The probability of that is super slim for so many reasons. Unsurprisingly, FPI projects the Dolphins to finish with the first overall pick in the 2020 draft. It believes Miami to have a staggering 77.6% shot of finishing with the top selection, either through its own pick, 76.6%, or the first rounder the Dolphins got from the Steelers for Fitzpatrick, 1%. The Pittsburgh's pick is projected to come in as the 9th selection, while the first rounder the Dolphins acquired from the Texans as part of the Tunsil deal is expected to be the 23rd selection. In all, the Dolphins will have 3 first-round picks in the 2020 draft and 2 in the 2021 draft. They have 2 second-round picks in both 2020 and 2021, their own third-rounders in each season, and if we assume they'll get a 4th-round comp pick from losing offensive tackle Juwan James, an extra 4th rounder in this year's class. The Browns had 5 first-round picks from 2017 to 2018, including consecutive first overall picks, and used them to acquire Mayfield Garrett, tight end David Njoku, cornerback Denzel Ward, and safety Jabril Peppers, with the latter then sent to the Giants as part of the OBJ trade. So one of their picks is already gone, and David Njoku's hurt right now. And so far, the Browns are still not even close to being a success in their rebuild yet. We're still several years away from being able to determine whether or not they can, 1, achieve success at all, and 2, whether or not they're able to then subsequently sustain that success afterwards. Quietly, though, the Dolphins were already starting to accumulate picks during the offseason in advance of the April's draft. Before the draft, they made a pair of swaps that didn't attract much attention at the time, but ones that helped indicate just how they were going to value draft picks during their rebuild. First, in lieu of cutting Tannehill, they restructured his contract before sending their former starter and a 6th-round pick to the Titans for a 7th rounder and a 2020 4th-round selection. As part of the restructure, the Dolphins paid Tannehill a $5 million bonus, leaving the Titans to pay Tannehill just $2 million. So that's another... Like, I don't know why they point that out as like a good thing. So they decide to like eat some of his contract to get rid of him. Like, that's not necessarily a good thing. Essentially, the Dolphins bought a 2020 4th-round pick for $5 million and the swap of late round selections in 2019. Meanwhile, on March 15th, the Dolphins chose to pay Robert Quinn a $1.1 million roster bonus as opposed to cutting the former Rams standout. They likely didn't expect to keep Quinn on their roster, but paying him the bonus assured Miami of time to trade away the edge rusher. Okay, but you're still losing though. So you pay that money, and Robert Quinn is doing well. I mean, he got a sack against us, you know, and we have no pass rush whatsoever. Plus, again, picks that, you know, you have to hope on. Anyway, let's continue. The Dolphins ended up netting a 2020 6th-round pick from the Cowboys as part of the swap, with Quinn taking a slight pay cut to join Dallas. In all, they paid just over $6 million for 4th and 6th round selections in the 2020 draft. So we paid $6 million to get those drafts essentially, which I think that comparison makes sense. The price would be slightly more after we account for moving down 1 round. It's reminiscent of the infamous 2017 trade the Browns made for Brock Osweiler when Cleveland essentially absorbed his $16 million salary for a 2nd-round pick from the Texans. But look how that worked out. It hasn't. Brock Osweiler has been a failure. They had to absorb all of that money for absolutely no reason. Let's continue on though. That deal didn't make financial sense at the time unless the Browns were able to move Osweiler along for future compensation or get something out of him as a player, neither of which ended up occurring. The pick ended up coming in higher than expected, as a disappointing Texans season meant that their second rounder was the 35th pick. The Browns used it to draft Nick Chubb, which is good. He's a good running back, but again, still far from even knowing if that's going to be successful. And that trade was not a good trade. They had the cap space, but it was essentially just a waste. A quick poll of a handful of NFL executives suggests that most teams wouldn't pay $6 million to acquire those picks, especially given that the picks were more than a year away from being realized. The money would represent a bargain if the Dolphins are able to find a quality starter in either round, but the chances of an average team finding that sort of player in the 4th or 6th rounds isn't particularly high. Okay, again, this gamble that they are taking is massive, and they're setting themselves up for so much failure and waste that it's so much more likely to fail than be successful. It's defensible. No, it's not. And buying picks is likely a better way for the Dolphins to use their money than handing it out to veterans in free agency, but it's tough to see it as creating surplus value. So it doesn't even create surplus value, and he's saying that it's a good thing and it's defensible if they don't go out and spend in free agency. But Chris Greer just told us they expect to be aggressive in free agency. So what that means, what that tells me, is they expect to spend big money on high-priced free agents. Not the way to go. The moves to trade away Tunsil... the moves to trade away Tunsil, Fitzpatrick, and receiver Kenny Stills make more sense. No, they don't. But he thinks so, and I'm giving you his perspective. Although, again, these arguments that he's making really only are counterintuitive to his points. Or to his end point that all of this makes sense. In each case, the team was realistically blown away by an offer for promising talent. The Dolphins picked up 2 first-round picks and a second-rounder for Tunsil, Stills, and 4th and 6th-round picks. Compare that to what the Raiders got for Khalil Mack, who cost the Bears 2 first-rounders, a 3rd-rounder, and a 6th, but who came with 2nd and 5th-round picks from a terrible Raiders team. Khalil Mack is, again, another generational talent, though, as is Laramie Tunsil. Using the Chase Stewart value chart and projecting each team to be league average besides the Dolphins, who will conservatively project as the 5th worst team in the league in 2020, the Texans sent more to the Dolphins for Tunsil and Stills than the Bears sent to the Raiders for Mack. Tunsil still has time before free agency, and Stills would have netted a late round pick on his own, but Mack is the more valuable player. I disagree with that, though, because again, premier position, sure, at defensive end, but so is Tunsil at left tackle. That's a premier position, and they're both generational talents. And Stills is a great number 2 receiver. Great number 2, and him and Tunsil both did really well in that game against the Chargers and helped them overcome the Chargers this past week. The Fitzpatrick deal might be even better. No, it's not, dude. Anyway, because a for sure proven commodity for a guess, a hope, a prayer. While the Steelers were able to acquire a promising defensive back with 4 years of cost control remaining, they shipped off a first-round pick after starting 0-2 and knowing they'll need to start an untested backup for the remaining 14 games of the season. And again, though, these reasons would suggest that they wouldn't trade for a defensive back when they actually need a quarterback. But anyway, Pittsburgh has suggested it won't drop off much from Ben Roethlisberger with Mason Rudolph under center, and the trade clearly backs up that confidence. But if the Steelers really felt like Rudolph wasn't much of a drop-off from Roethlisberger, they shouldn't have given the 37-year-old Roethlisberger a $68 million extension in April. Fitzpatrick is unquestionably talented, but this deal gives the Dolphins a chance to draft a player whose cost-controlled years better align with their window for contention. So that could possibly make sense, and one of my arguments was that this young talent is going to be wasted, but again, it's a fucking chance that you have absolutely no guarantee whatsoever is going to even come close to being what he is, or adequate. Right? Again, the Browns are super far still from, realizing success, let alone sustained success. And they have so much talent. Again, that's one area I'm probably going to be wrong this year. I thought they were going to be a lot better because of all of that talent. And clearly, that's not necessarily the case. It also allows them to trade down for a better haul without having to pass up the opportunity to take a quarterback with their own first-round pick. If the pick is high enough, and FPI projects a 25.2% chance of Pittsburgh's selection falling in the top 5, they could plausibly draft a quarterback and then trade Pittsburgh's selection for a boatload of picks to a team that wants to draft another one of the signal callers. That's provided it falls into the top 5, that 25.2% chance, and that also is provided that the Dolphins would be smart enough to handle all this. But we'll see if that's the case. And with the one draft that we have under their belt, I'm not really confident. Moving on, the importance of infrastructure. There's a lesson to be learned from Cleveland's tanking, though I'm not sure it applies clearly to the Dolphins given their circumstances. Early in their process, the Browns let 3 of their most talented young players leave in free agency. Wide receiver Travis Benjamin, safety Tashawn Gibson, and offensive tackle Mitchell Schwartz all left Cleveland, with the Browns picking up compensatory selections in return. They also lost center Alex Mack at the same time, though he wanted to leave years earlier and was forced to stay when the Browns matched the Jaguars' offer sheet. At the first possible opportunity, he opted out of his contract and left for the Falcons. Real quick, so see, he was an example of somebody who wanted to jet set. We've already seen that plenty with the Dolphins now, and I expect that actually to continue. The massive purges, I think we'll see a lot more of that next offseason, roster purges, and a bunch of guys who want to get the fuck out of here. Cleveland wasn't able to use draft picks to replace its missing starters. Okay, great. Well, that's good news. It drafted several wideouts, including first-rounder Corey Coleman, but had to trade for Beckham and Jarvis Landry to solidify its receiving core. And there's even talk about them trading Jarvis Landry. It sent quarterback Deshaun Kaiser to the Packers for defensive back Demarius Randall in what appears to be one of new general manager John Dorsey's best trades after taking over for the Browns. Schwartz, though, was a loss the Browns have yet to solve. The offensive line remains Cleveland's biggest weakness, even after Browns spent millions to bring in the likes of J.C. Treader and Kevin Zeitler. Dorsey followed by signing former Steelers tackle Chris Hubbard, but the departure of Schwartz and the retirement of future Hall of Famer Joe Thomas has been a problem Dorsey has yet to fix. The line issues have instilled worrisome habits in Mayfield, whose propensity to panic under the hint of pressure and bail out of the pocket repeatedly reared its head against the Rams last Sunday. So again, it's a major reason why I don't think Josh Rosen is being done any favors and why he won't end up working out here in the long term, and also why it doesn't matter who we bring in as quarterback next year in the draft if the offensive line is garbage and he gets murdered, and then you stunt his growth and development, because then he will build bad habits. And that's why Ryan Tannehill was even more exceptional than people give him credit for, because he had to deal with that. Yet still, that motherfucker stood in the pocket so many times and just took big hits to deliver big throws and was successful on so many occasions. That's why he continued playing even though he was pissing blood towards the end of one season, right? That's why up until the unfortunate, uncontrollable collision of Calais Campbell's helmet to his knee, Ryan Tannehill was an Iron Man, right? And it's like, anyway, he never developed those bad habits. He put up good numbers and continued to grow and develop every year, despite being the most sacked quarterback in the league, right? He has a mental, and that's why he never should they have brought in a quarterback every year in the 3rd round or later? Probably, like in the 5th round or later while Tannehill was here? Yes. But did he actually need competition? No. That was the argument so many people used, that Tannehill needed competition. It's not that he needed it. Would it have been good for him, and could it have helped and actually provided him with a good backup? Yeah. And should they have brought in a guy every year? Yeah, that's my philosophy. Draft a quarterback every year in the 3rd round or later, depending on your actual need. but he never needed it because of his work ethic and because of his mental makeup. The dude is so strong. Anyway, I suspect that Mayfield will overcome those issues, but the issues the Browns have had protecting their quarterbacks reiterates how important it is to have the right infrastructure around a young quarterback. For so many passers, guys like Sam Darnold, Josh Allen, and Mitchell Trubisky come to mind. Their rookie year was essentially a waste of time without the right weapons and or the right protection. So I don't understand how people can, like, this dude can say that but not realize that if the Dolphins take a quarterback high in the draft next year, he's going to be in that situation. Each of those quarterbacks needed their organizations to go on an off-season spree before we could even pretend to realistically evaluate their chances of success. If we assume that the Dolphins would draft Alabama's Tua Tagovailoa or Oregon's Justin Herbert with the first overall pick in 2020, they'll face the same issues. So we see he does admit it, but like how then do you translate that into that could be successful? After trading Tunsil and letting James leave for a huge deal from the Broncos in free agency, the Dolphins have one of the worst offensive lines in recent memory. While they're enthused about undrafted free agent receiver Preston Williams and will still have Wilson under contract for one more season, they will also likely need to invest in weapons for their new quarterback. When you and by the way, if Rosen for whatever reason isn't the long-term guy, then you miss out on a second-round pick. Your second-round pick from this draft is already then a bust, as well as I think it was a fifth-round selection that they gave up from next year. Those picks are already completely wasted if you take a quarterback high in the next draft and Rosen ends up eventually falling to the wayside and eventually not even being on this team, which I think is likely to be the case. So anyway, when you tank, though, you aren't exactly a desirable landing spot for veteran free agents. Again, another massive issue, and why in the NFL it makes things super hard to achieve. While it's fair to suggest that Miami as a city might be more appealing to the average player in a vacuum than Cleveland, the Browns had to pay over the odds to sign free agents or keep the talented players they acquired. We also do have the added benefit of no state tax, which is true, income tax, which is true, but still, the Dolphins would have to overpay for free agents to get them to find it worth it to come here. After they traded for Jamie Collins, they were only able to coax the former Patriots star into staying by giving him an extension averaging $12.5 million per season, the largest for any inside linebacker at the time. And so this cap space, with the way that they'll have to pay free agents, with as aggressive as they say that they're going to be in free agency, blah, 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 and then eventually having to even pay their own in-house stars if they do that. But if they adopt the Patriots way, they'll just keep getting rid of all of our up-and-coming young stars that we drafted. And so it's a recipe for unmitigated disaster. Not just disaster, but unmitigated. It, like I said, lightning speed through the fucking the negative extreme and continuing. Zeitler likewise got the largest average salary for any guard in league history to leave the Bengals. Their other multi-year deal in free agency went to wideout Kenny Britt, whose 9-game stint with the team cost Cleveland $10.5 million. The Dolphins will need to surround their quarterback, whoever he is, with the sort of talent that creates good habits. Those players likely aren't on the current roster, and they won't be for years to come, no matter what. How long will it take to get back to the playoffs? One other frustrating reality of tanking is that there's no timetable on when things will turn around. Getting a promising young quarterback is great, of course, but the Colts were never able to parlay Andrew Luck into a Super Bowl trip. Trubisky and Deshaun Watson haven't yet won playoff games. Neither is Matthew Stafford. Jameis Winston and Sam Bradford, both first overall picks, have combined for 0 playoff berths over 13 seasons in the league. I mean, all of this is just more data to prove me right. History that this is going to be a massive failure. History tells us that it takes time for the absolute worst teams in league history to rebuild their roster to the point where they're competitive, even in the era of the salary cap. 12 teams in NFL history have lost 15 or more games in a season. 2 of those teams were the 2016-2017 Cleveland Browns, whose future still remains unknown. The track record of the other 10 teams suggests the Dolphins could be in for a wait. Those teams took an average of 3.7 years before they returned to the postseason. An average. But no team has ever tanked to this level ever. And we are on pace to rapidly shatter, not just break, but shatter the record set by the worst teams in NFL history. If you set the standard for completing a rebuild as a postseason win, the 10 organizations averaged more than 7.5 years before celebrating a January victory, and that number is rising. So let's read those stats again. The track record of the other 10 teams suggests the Dolphins could be in for a wait. Those teams took an average of 3.7 years before they returned to the postseason, just got to the postseason. If you set the standard for completing a rebuild as a postseason win, the 10 organizations averaged more than 7.5 years. 7.5 years before celebrating a January victory, and that number is rising. So you Dolphins fans, so you're telling me that you are willing to have the worst team in NFL history ever, potentially this season, and then have to wait 7.5 years before we even, and again, that number is rising, before we can even celebrate a postseason victory, before we can win our first, dude, again, and why this was all unnecessary. Does anybody think that we would be even close to this bad if Adam Gase was fired and this purge wasn't done? Like, are you serious? Like, if the team would have got healthy and if they would have had one more good draft, dude, we could have been in the postseason this year. This year. 7.5 years and rising before any of the teams that have even done a tank or lost, not even tanked, but just lost that many games in a season. Just because they were that bad. Not even necessarily tanking, just because they were that bad. And we are going to be the worst team in NFL history. Very potentially. Oh my God. The Dolphins 1-15 in 2007 and the Lions 0-16 in 2008 haven't yet won a playoff game since bottoming out. So even our mediocre record has led to that, but we're extending that record by being historically bad. The worst case scenario belongs to the 1980 Saints, who went 1-15. It took New Orleans 7 years to post a winning record or make it back to the postseason. Jim Mora's teams made 4 postseason appearances without winning a game. It took them 20 years from that 1-15 campaign to win their first playoff game in franchise history. Oh my God. On the other hand, 3 teams, the 1989 Cowboys, 1996 Jets, and 2001 Panthers, won a playoff game just 2 years after their 1-15 seasons. But how have they been since then? The Jets certainly haven't maintained any kind of level of sustained success. The Panthers, right? And now Cam Newton's hurt. The Cowboys, are the best of all of those, but come on, really? And does anybody think that we're going to make it to the playoffs in 2 years? Like, legitimately? Come on. The Cowboys are the most interesting team of the 3 for a couple of reasons. For one, they tanked before the term was even introduced. Long before analytics were widely adopted across professional sports and studies suggested that teams were smart to trade down and acquire additional picks. There's a difference, though, between trading down and accruing picks and tanking, especially to this level. Jimmy Johnson rode the bounty of the Herschel Walker trade and several other trade downs to amass a huge amount of draft capital. That's way different, though, than tanking. That is not tanking. That is not tanking. That is being smart and just, that's the smart way to accrue draft capital and give yourself more chances to throw at the dartboard. Not the way that the Dolphins are doing it. And that's a total false equivalency. Like, are you serious? You're really gonna equate teams trading down from whatever position they pick in the draft down whatever amount of spots to accrue it, also additional draft capital in later rounds or in future drafts, to massive purges and being historically bad on the field and so on and so forth? No, those are just to acquire draft picks and cap space. No, it's not the same thing, not even close to the same thing. Anyway, 3 years after going 1-15, the Cowboys were Super Bowl champions. 15 of their 22 starters during their second Super Bowl run in 1993 were players Johnson had drafted. Okay, but that is the massive, massive outlier. And again, what he just described there was not even a tank. That was not even a tank. So it's not even the same situation. Not even the same situation. But it's not even the same fucking ball field, right? But if you want to put it on the same field, then completely the outlier. Even though it's not on the same field, and I just don't know how you think it's even close. Again, he just explained that he called it tanking, but he said that before the term was even considered a thing, maybe that's because they weren't actually tanking. They were just doing it smart and trading down in the draft as opposed to like trading up and overextending for players and even over just picking where they were. They did the smart thing, yeah, and if they weren't happy with the pick where they were, you trade down and accrue more. That's the smart way to accrue additional draft capital. The other interesting element with those Cowboys, Johnson was the only coach from this bunch who ran the team during their 15-plus loss season and then remained in charge long enough to win a playoff game with the same team. So that's another thing. I seriously doubt this regime is going to have that long. Especially with an average of 7.5 years before you win a postseason game. Hell nah. They're not going to last 7.5 years, bro. Hell nah. Even if they lasted the entirety of his guaranteed contract, it's not going to happen. Every other coach was fired by the time the team got good, which is also true for the teams on our list that haven't yet won playoff games after their dismal campaign. This was also the case for the Cubs and Astros, who bottomed out with one manager and won the World Series with another. So it's not, this article literally is just example after example after example of why it's not going to work. Anyway, let's continue though. Sixers coach Brett Brown, one of the few holdovers from the first days of the Hinkie era, is one of the few exceptions to this rule. All of this leaves Flores in an awkward situation. The former Patriots defensive coach has publicly suggested that the Dolphins aren't tanking. Owner Stephen Ross hasn't been a patient man since taking over from Wayne Huizenga. No coach has finished a fourth season under Ross's ownership. Reports have suggested that Ross was on board with the rebuilding plan, and he's surely been consulted as the Dolphins have made further trades to shed talent. But Browns owner Jimmy Haslam was all in with the analytics-driven movement in Cleveland until his team went 1-31. Flores is stuck with the toughest part of this rebuild. It's not his fault the Dolphins spent years drafting poorly while spending too much money in free agency to try to plug holes on a below-average team. Absolutely, although there are some things that need to be noted there. We were just an average team. We've been mediocre, somewhere between 10-6 and 6-10, usually right around 8-8 for most of the past couple decades. Also, the past few drafts have been really good. I disagreed with the 2019 draft, but the ones in Adam Gase era were really good, right? And a lot of those players aren't here now, but that's because this organization has gotten rid of them. Anyway, he has to convince players who know the season is going nowhere to play hard. He has to bear the brunt of frustrated fans and serve as a media punchline. If he does his job well, which he hasn't at all yet, there's a good chance someone else will get to reap the benefits. Flores knew all this when he took over, of course, and it speaks to his own mental toughness that Flores chose to take the job anyway. The odds are certainly against him. Honestly, at this point, it's not even mental toughness. It's like masochism. Like you're literally just destroying your own career for nothing. For nothing. For absolutely nothing. So, but that plays right in line with all the questionable decisions he's made as the head coach of the Miami Dolphins since he's been here. Like on and off the field. So, Anyway, the ethics of tanking and the NFL's options. Flores, of course, is only putting his reputation and legacy on the line. His players are risking much more. While pitchers have a limited number of throws in their arms and basketball players are one false step from serious injuries, football is a contact sport. The attrition rates are higher and the careers are shorter. Again, why this has yet to prove a successful, approach in the NFL. Research by the Wall Street Journal suggested the average NFL career now lasts less than 3 seasons. You can fit an entire career into the bottom of one NFL team's rebuild. In his video segment talking about the dangers of tanking, Foxworth went beyond the physical danger of players being placed in situations in which they don't have the appropriate support and talent around them. He correctly pointed out that the players who go through the tanking efforts are going to have bad tape and the stink of a losing season on their resumes, which will make it more difficult for those players to catch on elsewhere. Hence why these players should not, have to deal with this or agree to it. Take the 1-15 Browns from 2016. Of the 15 players who played the most snaps for that team on offense, 7 are out of football. The same is true for 5 of the top 15 on defense. 3 more are either on practice squads or injured reserve. Many of those players who are still in the league are backups or roster fodder. Only 2 of those players, guard Joel Bitonio and linebacker Christian Kirksey, are still Brown starters. I mean, really? This entire article literally is an argument for why it's not going to work. Anyway, for a young team, that's remarkable. Just 2 of the Browns' 14 draft picks that year are still on the roster. Linebacker Joe Schobert and wideout Rashard Higgins. It's possible that none of those missing players belong in the NFL on sheer merit alone, but I suspect either the bad film or the relationship with losing has closed doors on players who might have gotten better opportunities elsewhere. To be fair, there are likely players who might not have ever gotten a shot at the NFL who will have a shot at launching their career. But when they're put in this terrible situation, their careers will just be killed. A more competitive Dolphins team might have tried to win, which would have meant signing veterans to meaningful deals. Instead, players like guard Shaq Calhoun will have opportunities to take snaps. Some or most of those players won't break through or have long careers though, and starting behind the curve doesn't do them any favors. I'd also argue that teams have been tanking for high draft picks for decades now. Consider the 2009 Rams, who were a combined 1-11 with Mark Bolger and Kyle Bowler at quarterback before turning things over to the inimitable Keith Null. With the Rams tanking to get Bradford, Null averaged 4.8 yards per attempt and threw 3 times as many interceptions, 9 as touchdown passes, 3. He went 0-4 and the Rams got the quarterback they wanted. There's not the wholesale trading of talent for picks, but teams have certainly given less than 100% at key positions in years past. Again, not nearly to this level, and the Rams didn't even become successful until way after that. That was the 2009 Rams. They didn't start really gaining the success that they're having now until a couple years ago. So they went through a whole bunch more shit, years and years. Again, just reason after reason why this is going to be a massive failure. In the big picture, though, I agree with Foxworth. Tanking might be analytically friendly, but which it's actually even not, which he proved. But in football, it's distasteful at best and outright morally reprehensible at worst. The Cowboys might be the only truly successful example of a team tanking before positively turning their franchise around. Again, though, as he described it, they didn't even tank. All they did was trade down in the draft to accrue more picks. That's not tanking. That's absolutely not tanking whatsoever. Anyway, and even they needed a once-in-a-lifetime trade offer for a running back to make it logical for their franchise. At the same time, I'm not sure how you legislate it out of football. You can institute a lottery, but the NBA and NHL have both shown that teams will happily tank if there's a talented enough player at the top of the draft lottery. You could limit the number of draft picks a team can acquire, but that would artificially cap legitimate rebuilding plans that don't involve tanking. The reality is that the NFL and the NFLPA built a collective bargaining agreement that makes draft draft talent incredibly valuable. When the league switched to a slotted draft system in 2011, it incentivized teams to tank and target a quarterback who might be worth $60 million to $80 million in surplus value over the length of his rookie contract. Owners were frustrated with paying out record deals to players like Stafford before they even stepped onto the field, but the pendulum has now swung too far to the other way. Every other major U.S. sport operates under an economic system designed to make young prospects pay their dues while earning pennies of their full value. The solution, or part of the solution, might be to raise the cost of draft pick contracts in the first round to try and make those picks less desirable. They also honestly just need to get rid of free agency. Go back to the time pre-free agency. There's no innate reason Kyler Murray needs to make as much over his 4-year rookie contract as Russell Wilson will make in cash this year, $35 million. If teams really felt like the risk of landing on a bust wasn't worth the reward, we wouldn't be seeing them swoop in with multiple draft picks to try to grab the passer of the future. The other way would be for a star player to say that he won't go play for a team comfortable with tanking, which could very well happen. We could very well see players be like, nah, I don't want to go to the Dolphins. First overall picks have failed to report and forced a trade before, including Danny Ferry in the NBA and Eli Manning in the NFL. If Tagovailoa had come out over the summer and said he would insist on a trade away from any team that actively tried to lose, there would be no debate. Until then, the Dolphins are like the latest and most egregious example of tanking in the NFL. Yeah, anyway, so that was literally, I mean, it was titled, you know, how they can win with this, but it literally was an entire thing of why it's not going to work. Anyway, it's a super long video. It's an hour long, but it was a really good article. And there are, you know, I want to give you guys as much context, as much data and information as much information as I possibly can. That's why I've been reading these articles to you and stuff, as opposed to just, you know, like telling you about them and stuff. So, and different perspectives from different places, different writers and different, you know, whatever. So anyway, I am going to get out of here. This video was, you know, like I said, it's now over an hour long. So I hope you guys enjoy my videos. If you do, excuse me. If you do, make sure you hit the subscribe button. Make sure you hit the like button. Make sure you hit the bell if you want to get the alerts. Leave your questions, comments, and concerns down in the comment section. And of course, as always, make sure you follow me on Twitter at Dillon Tartaro. And with that, I am out. I'll see y'all soon. Fins up.